Maria Davis, a goal-setting coach that has been helping students and teachers achieve their goals for years, and I'm here to help you do the same. I believe life isn't about chasing after what you want. It's about accessing the unique power that's already inside of you so you can step into the life of your wildest dreams. If you're looking to do life differently, live a life that's designed just for you, make your dreams a reality, and ditch the hustle, then you're in the right place. My goal for this podcast is to give you tools, resources, and tips to discover who you are at your most authentic level, help you get back in the driver's seat of your life, and send you love and encouragement along the way. Welcome to It's the Audacity for Me. Hey there, and welcome back to It's the Audacity for Me. I am your host, Rhea Davis, and this week we are going to be talking about having the audacity to end hunger and poverty. I've been thinking a lot about this topic since I recorded the episode on sustainability, and this is something that I've always really been passionate about and wanted. I just have so much information and have seen so much as a teacher in public schools in different states. And I've seen the effects of poverty on children. I've seen how the cycle of poverty works. I've seen all of these things that really just continue in a cycle. And while I don't have the answers or the perfect solution, I feel like the more people that are aware of these problems and how this cycle works, the more people there are that can create change. So this is a little bit off from my normal content, but I still think it's important because I think that if we are working on ourselves and cultivating love for ourselves and building this dream life, why not try and bring others with us? Why not face it from a realistic point of view instead of being part of the problem? So that was why I decided to record this episode. I hope that this gives you some information that maybe you didn't know before. And I really aim to provide actionable tips on how we can play a part in ending hunger and poverty. So let's get started. Ending hunger and poverty is a really, really, really big topic. It's not something that I could cover in one single episode of a podcast, let alone even a whole podcast. I'm sure there are podcasts dedicated just solely to this topic. But what I wanted to do is give an introduction, maybe, or just an overview of how poverty impacts people, how it impacts people being hungry and not having access to healthy foods, and how that plays into the cycle of poverty as well. So there are so many different things that we could talk about on this topic. Like I said, this is kind of just like a crash course introduction, because I believe that the more people that are aware of the problems that poverty presents and how it affects so many people in our population, the more people that there are to help solve it and help do something about it. So that's why I felt inspired to speak on poverty and ending hunger. And I hope it inspires you. I hope that you learn something new. I hope that I can provide you with some actionable steps that you can take to help end poverty and hunger. So there are so many things that contribute to poverty, and there's a reason why people talk about the cycle of poverty. Once an individual is in this cycle of poverty, whether they were born into it or they, end up in it, each generation after that person becomes more and more impoverished because there isn't anything helping them to get out. So that's the first part of this cycle. But there are also tons of other things that contribute to people remaining in poverty once they're in it, whether born into it or came into it for whatever reason. So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are related to children because that's kind of where this cycle starts, right? A lot of people and children are born into poverty. 13 million American children are hungry every day. So it's pretty important. It's kind of the foundation of society, right? They're the next leaders. So that's why I'm kind of starting there. I also have a background in education as a special education teacher. So that's kind of where my background and knowledge is on this subject. So in childhood, each of us have different childhood experiences. And there are something called ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. These are things like abuse, neglect, dysfunction that can happen to children. And once one of these things happen, more are likely to happen. So, for example, if a child is in a home where they are, maybe someone in the family has a substance abuse disorder and they're abusing substances, well, it is more likely that there's going to be abuse in that household because once there's one ACE, there's an increased likelihood for others. Now, I'm not saying that every household that has substance abuse has physical abuse. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that the likelihood for another ACE goes up once a child experiences one of these. So maybe a child is experiencing emotional neglect, the likelihood of maybe mental illness goes up, or the likelihood of experiencing mental illness, or vice versa. Someone in the household has a mental illness and results in or an untreated mental illness, I should say, and that results in another ACE happening for that child. So hopefully that makes sense. But when you have these and the increased likelihood of more occurring, the more that happen, you run into a situation where children are experiencing all this before they've even learned about the world, right? This is their experience of the world, and this is what they view as normal. So in the future, it puts them at risk of depression, COPD, cancer, severe obesity, diabetes. All of these things are things that could potentially be prevented if the child hadn't had those adverse childhood experiences. So these are all things that set them up. I don't want to say set them up for failure, but definitely decrease the likelihood of success because it's things just stacked against this child. And poverty is an adverse childhood experience. So anyone that lives in poverty is already more likely to experience other types of, dysfunction, abuse, or neglect. So that's the first part of poverty that is an issue. Now let's look at how the school system's set up, because that's children at home who live in poverty, right? So when they go to school, what are they experiencing? Well, schools are funded based on where they're at. So communities that have high rates of poverty also don't have as much funding for their schools as school buildings that are located in more affluent areas. And while the curriculum's the same across the board, usually across districts, teachers are on the same salary, so it's not really an issue with that. The issue more comes in with the extra things, the money for cool science experiments and hands-on activities and technology and, craft supplies and maybe specials teachers and art and music and all of these things that the more affluent communities can afford because their funding comes from the area, the parents in the area who can afford to donate more to the school. So not only are children, do children have the odds stacked against them at home with the adverse childhood experiences and all of that, But they also have the odds stacked against them in comparison to the more affluent communities because the funding is not equal for the school. So those are two things. Now let's progress as this child gets older. They're going through the education system. Well, if you're living in poverty, you're probably not that concerned about learning math if you're hungry, if you're tired, if have stayed up all night because your parents were fighting or, there was something crazy happening. So your education is not going to be that important to you. And there are children who graduate and don't even know how to read. These things happen, or maybe they drop out because they're really struggling and they're not able to pass because they can't read. So they've had the odds stacked against them from the time that they were born into poverty. And then we expect them to go through an education system that isn't taking care of them because they live in poverty. So then when they go to get jobs, they're not qualified because they're not able to do the basic things that these jobs are requiring. Not to mention, jobs require resources. It's expensive to get a job. Not only do you have to be able to answer all the questions, usually they require a GED or a high school diploma, but let's say you got that far and you're able to read the application, you filled it out, you have to have interview skills, which most public schools don't teach, especially ones in lower income communities, because I can't imagine that many have the funding for that. But aside from that, let's say you pass all of that and you do get the job. Well, now you have to worry about how you're getting to and from the job. You have to worry about paying for gas. You're not going to receive a paycheck for at least 2 weeks. And you have to buy probably non-slip shoes, a uniform. Maybe you need to get a haircut. I don't know the ins and outs of your situation, but there's a lot of things and a lot of work that goes into getting a job and being able to get there and pay for all these things up front that you'll, kind of get reimbursed for later with your minimum wage. And then at the end of the day, are you making enough to afford rent? And if you have children, are you making enough to support them? And that's really how the cycle of poverty continues. So that was a real quick down and dirty intro on just some things that affect or contribute to the cycle of poverty. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to talk about the impact of this cycle on the people that are living in it and how that affects society as a whole. I started this show by talking about the cycle of poverty more on an individual level, maybe what poverty could look like, depending on the situation, but just more on an individual level. Now I want to talk more about what poverty looks like for a group of people who are in poverty. And before I dive into that, I want to just say that if you are in the cycle of poverty, or you're struggling financially, or you're just struggling with resources or anything like that, I created my podcast and my business based on the concept of helping people, which is why I'm recording this episode, because I feel like more awareness to some of these issues can bring more help. I do plan on doing episodes in the future with specific resources and things that you can do to help you out. I've learned a ton of tips and tricks over the years for finding free things, finding resources, ways to make extra money, just, things to get you by, and maybe give you a little bit of a leg up. So I just wanted to talk about, I wanted to get that out of the way because I want whoever's listening, I want you to know that I created this to help people. Like, that's my goal. If I do nothing else but help people, I'm happy with that. But yeah, so take that for what you will. If you have any questions, or if you are somebody that is in need of help, please feel free to reach out and I can try and help you find what you're looking for and what can help you. All right, so let's talk about poverty and hunger as far as like a societal impact within the group that is in poverty. So if you are living in poverty, or if you are, in that situation, there's a lot of things that are more likely to occur. So, as far as the individual experience, I talked about adverse childhood experiences and how once you had one, it was more likely for you to have another. So, once you're in poverty, you're already at risk for other situations to happen. And people don't realize how many people in America are living in poverty. 13 million children experience food insecurity. I just paused there. The audio didn't stop working. I just wanted to pause for a second because 13 million. Like that number is insane. There's no reason that 13 million children are worried about where their next meal is coming from. So, what we're doing as a society, if there are people in a society who are living in poverty, then that society is the one who suffers. Obviously, poverty is not fun. I am not diminishing anything about living in poverty, but you're robbing society of people that could be Nobel Prize winners, brain surgeon, engineers, all sorts of amazing things that could advance society. But if they grow up in poverty and that's all that they've ever known, by the time they make it to adulthood, they're too worn down and they've been trained to accept that poverty is normal and that they can't get out. So that is one huge reason to work towards ending poverty. But also thinking about people who are living in poverty, they're more likely to experience chronic illness, disease, lower birth weight in infants. There's a higher risk of lead poisoning, depending on housing. There are tons of different problems with living in poverty, right? And so not only does society as a whole suffer from the potential that is lost to poverty, but society also suffers economically. I mean, that the more people in poverty, the less our economy is going to grow. And again, the more people in poverty, the more social problems you will have, because the likelihood of those adverse childhood experiences goes up. So it's not just an individual's problem. It's not just a certain city's problem or a certain county's problem or a certain agency's problem. It really is everyone's problem. It affects all of us when anyone lives in poverty. And I truly believe that we are all one. We have a responsibility to fellow human beings to help everyone live a better life. If you're listening to this podcast, you hopefully have a pretty open mind and recognize that we're not the only person on this earth, and we're not the only, we're just a speck on a big, 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 big world. And there's no reason that we can't help each other out. And that doesn't always mean financially. What we're going to do is take a quick break, and I'm going to talk about the ways that you can help today to end hunger and end poverty. So we've talked about kind of the gloomy side of poverty, and it, to be honest, is a pretty gloomy topic. It's not something that you want in society. It's not something you want anyone to have to go through. But there are some things that you can do to put a dent in this problem, to use your power for good and impact countless people in the process. So, like I said before, it's not all about money. You can volunteer. There are several places that would love to have you help out at a food drive or a food pantry, or maybe it's one of the like drive-through food pickup kind of things. I know with COVID, things are a little bit different, but volunteering can really, really help. And you don't have to think about just food pantries and food kitchens and things like that. Honestly, one of the best places I feel like you could volunteer is like a pregnancy center or a place that helps new moms with formula, diapers, that kind of thing. When I had my first son, there was a pregnancy center that I went to, and they were so nice. And yeah, it's scary when you have a baby. Like, you don't know what to do with it. Like, I mean, you have your instincts, but they don't come with a manual, as I guess, cliche says. So they were super helpful. They gave me tons of resources. They gave me tons of stuff for my son, but that wasn't really the point. It was just having somebody that could tell me what to do if a diaper rash happened, that kind of thing. So when you volunteer, think outside the box. Think about organizations that help local youth, like after school programs or tutoring or, anything like that. Maybe you have a special talent. Like, maybe you're a yoga instructor. You could, volunteer and give an hour to a local high school. Maybe they have like a yoga club. There are so many things that you can do to just impact kids' lives that you wouldn't even realize. I'll give another example, because I do work part-time in a school as a special educator, and I've had tons of experience with the kids, and all the extravagant things that I've done over the time that I've been teaching and working with children, that's never what they remember. When schools shut down due to the pandemic last spring, kids, we were mailing cards and letters and things back and forth, and all of them were just these teeny tiny things that I never even thought about. It was taking them for a walk outside to look for turtles, or, telling them their shoes looked pretty, or walking them to their classroom on their first day. It is the littlest things that make the biggest difference. And even, like I said, it's not about money. If you can't contribute financially, just giving kids a positive example, a positive role model from different backgrounds, shows them that the sky is the limit. There is no limit. The possibilities are endless for them, because they've been given all of these options, right? They've seen examples of people who have done it. So that's just a suggestion. But volunteering is a great way to help out your community and really put an impact on poverty. Another thing you can do, now this is about the money, is donations, right? You can donate to community-based organizations, after-school programs, food kitchens, food pantries, homeless shelters, anywhere like that. Definitely look into the organization, make sure that they align with your values. But I definitely think working with local organizations is a great way to really have an impact where you are. So the last tip that I have isn't necessarily something that you can physically do, but it is something to think about. Right before we took the break, I talked about how we are robbing society. When a society has